In September 2014, the Mountain Monsters crew filmed an episode in Wirt County, West Virginia, investigating reports of the Yahoo cryptid that would never air on Destination America. Subscribe now because what the cameras captured during that investigation was so dangerous, so controversial, and so disturbing that network executives banned the episode immediately, ordered all footage locked away, and threatened legal action against anyone who discussed what happened. For 9 years, the episode remained hidden until leaked footage surfaced online in 2023. This is what really happened during the banned Mountain Monsters episode that the network desperately tried to keep secret. Mountain Monsters premiered on Destination America in 2013, following a team of Appalachian hunters and trappers known as the Appalachian Investigators of Mysterious Sightings, or AIMS team, as they tracked cryptids throughout the mountain regions of West Virginia, Kentucky, Virginia, and surrounding states. The show featured team leader John Trapper Tice, along with investigators Jeff Headley, William Wild Bill Neff, Joseph Huckleberry Lott, Jacob Buck Lowe, and Willie McQuillian. The format combined cryptid investigation with trap building, following the team as they interviewed witnesses, searched remote wilderness areas, and constructed elaborate traps attempting to capture creatures including Bigfoot variants, the Mothman, lizard demons, and other Appalachian cryptids. By season 2 in 2014, the show had developed a successful formula and dedicated following, leading producers to become increasingly ambitious about the creatures they would investigate and the risks the team would take during filming. In late summer 2014, producers planned an episode focusing on the Yahoo, a violent Bigfoot-like creature reported in Wirt County, West Virginia, with a reputation for being far more aggressive than typical Bigfoot encounters. Local legends described the Yahoo not as a shy forest dweller, but as a territorial predator that had allegedly attacked humans, killed livestock brutally, and defended its territory with extreme violence. Multiple witnesses had reported encounters where the Yahoo charged at people rather than fleeing, threw rocks with deadly accuracy, and made terrifying vocalizations that sounded like screaming combined with growling. The AIMS team had investigated aggressive cryptids before, but the Yahoo reports suggested something genuinely dangerous rather than just frightening. Producers were aware of the risks, but believed the team's experience and the dramatic footage potential justified proceeding with the investigation. The plan was to conduct a week-long investigation in the remote Wirt County wilderness, build a large trap designed to contain something extremely strong and violent, and attempt to capture evidence of the Yahoo through nighttime tracking and provocation. What producers didn't anticipate was how quickly the situation would spiral completely out of control, resulting in injuries, production equipment destruction, and footage so disturbing that network legal teams would determine it could never be broadcast. The investigation began in early September 2014, with the team arriving in Wirt County and setting up base camp in an area where Yahoo sightings had been concentrated. Local witnesses warned them that the creature was not like other cryptids they had investigated, that it was genuinely dangerous and had put people in the hospital with injuries from thrown rocks and physical attacks. Trapper dismissed the warnings as exaggeration, confident the team's experience would keep them safe. On the second night of filming, the AIMS team conducted a nighttime investigation in dense forest approximately 2 miles from their base camp, spreading out in pairs with night vision cameras to cover more ground and increase chances of encountering the Yahoo. Wild Bill and Buck were investigating a ravine area where witnesses had reported recent activity when something happened that was captured on both their handheld cameras and a static camera that had been positioned overlooking the ravine. The footage, which would later become the primary reason the episode was banned, shows Wild Bill and Buck hearing something large moving through brush approximately 50 yards from their position. Following standard protocol, they called out attempting to communicate and provoke response. What happened next occurred with shocking speed. A large, dark figure emerged from the tree line and charged directly toward Wild Bill and Buck, covering the distance in seconds while both men were scrambling backward trying to retreat. The night vision footage clearly shows both investigators falling as they tried to run, with Wild Bill hitting the ground hard. The figure reached Wild Bill's position while he was down. What the camera captured next was Wild Bill screaming in pain and terror while something off-camera was attacking him. Buck's camera shows him trying to reach Wild Bill but being unable to get close because of the figure that appears to be striking or grabbing Wild Bill repeatedly. The attack lasted approximately 15 seconds before the figure retreated back into darkness. When Buck finally reached Wild Bill, the cameras captured Wild Bill bleeding from multiple injuries, barely conscious, and in severe distress. The footage shows Buck calling frantically for help over radio, trying to assess Wild Bill's injuries while also watching the darkness in case the creature returned. Wild Bill had deep lacerations on his arms and torso that were bleeding heavily, later determined to be consistent with being struck by something with tremendous force or possibly clawed. He had a head injury where he had been knocked to the ground, and he was going into shock from the trauma and blood loss. The rest of the team reached their location within 10 minutes, bringing first aid supplies and helping to stabilize Wild Bill enough to move him. The decision was made to evacuate him immediately to the nearest hospital, rather than waiting for emergency services to navigate the remote location. The cameras captured the chaotic evacuation through dark forest, with Wild Bill being half carried by team members while everyone watched the darkness expecting another attack at any moment. This footage alone, showing a clear, violent attack on an investigator resulting in serious injuries, was enough to make network executives extremely nervous about airing the episode, but it was only the beginning of what would make the episode unbroadcastable. Wild Bill was transported to Camden Clark Medical Center approximately 45 minutes from the investigation site, arriving in the emergency department around 2 in the morning with injuries that required immediate treatment and raised serious questions among medical staff about what could have caused such trauma. The medical documentation, which later became part of the legal controversy around the episode, showed Wild Bill had sustained 4 deep lacerations on his left forearm, ranging from 4 to 7 inches in length, 2 lacerations on his right shoulder and upper chest, significant bruising across his torso consistent with blunt force trauma, a concussion from the head impact when he fell, and was treated for shock and blood loss. The lacerations required over 40 stitches total to close. Most significantly for the controversy that would follow, the attending physician documented that the wound patterns were unusual and didn't match typical injuries from falls, animal attacks, or accidental trauma from branches or rocks. The lacerations showed characteristics of being caused by something striking with considerable force in a downward motion, creating tears in the skin rather than clean cuts or typical claw marks. This documentation would later become crucial when network lawyers were determining whether the show could be held liable for putting cast members in situations that resulted in serious injury. While Wild Bill was being treated, production supervisors were having emergency discussions about whether to continue filming or shut down the investigation immediately. The standard practice for reality television when cast members are injured is to halt production, conduct safety reviews, and only resume if conditions can be made safe. However, the remaining Ames team members, particularly Trapper, insisted they needed to continue the investigation to document what had attacked Wild Bill and to prove they hadn't fabricated the incident. This created tension between the production team and network executives who were being updated about the situation in real time. The decision was made to pause filming for 24 hours while Wild Bill was evaluated, and while producers assessed whether continuing was safe and legally defensible. During this pause, something happened that would make the episode even more controversial and contribute to it being banned. Several team members, including Buck, who had witnessed the attack firsthand, began questioning whether they should continue putting themselves at risk for a television show. Buck expressed concerns on camera during interviews that what they encountered wasn't just an animal or even a typical cryptid, but something that appeared to be hunting them specifically and targeting them with intelligence and malicious intent. He stated he believed they had provoked something that was now actively trying to hurt or kill them, and that continuing the investigation would lead to someone being seriously injured or killed. Despite Wild Bill's hospitalization and Buck's serious concerns about safety, Trapper made the decision that the team would continue the investigation after the 24-hour pause, arguing that walking away would mean the attack on Wild Bill had been for nothing, and that they had an obligation to document what was in those woods. This decision created the first major conflict in Mountain Monsters history between team members, captured on camera in footage that network executives later determined could not be aired because it showed how production was prioritizing dramatic television over cast safety. The footage shows Buck and Trapper having a heated argument where Buck explicitly states he believes continuing is reckless and potentially fatal, while Trapper insists they can take additional precautions and that they owe it to Wild Bill to finish what they started. Buck ultimately agreed to continue but stated on camera that he was doing so against his better judgment and that if anyone else got hurt, the responsibility would fall on Trapper and the producers who were allowing this to continue. Production made several safety modifications for the continuation of filming. Additional crew members were brought in to maintain visual contact between team members at all times. Medical personnel were on standby closer to the investigation site. Team members were equipped with air horns and other deterrent devices, and critically, team members were authorized to carry firearms for self-defense, something that had not been done on previous Mountain Monsters investigations. This last modification would prove to be the most controversial aspect of the entire episode, and a primary reason it could never be broadcast. On the third night after Wild Bill's attack, the team returned to the investigation area with modified protocols and additional safety measures. The plan was to set up a large trap structure designed to contain something extremely strong, then conduct nighttime surveillance and tracking to document the Yahoo's behavior and potentially lure it toward the trap. Trapper, Buck, Huckleberry, and Jeff participated in this phase, while Willie remained at base camp monitoring communications. What happened during this third night created footage that was so problematic from legal, ethical, and broadcast standards perspectives that network executives immediately ordered all footage seized and locked away. The team had been working on the trap construction for several hours when they began hearing vocalizations from multiple directions surrounding their position. The sounds were described as howling mixed with screaming, coming from at least 3 different locations in a pattern that suggested coordination rather than random animal sounds. Trapper made the decision to split the team into pairs to investigate the different sound sources, hoping to triangulate the Yahoo's location. This decision, made against the safety protocols that had been established after Wild Bill's injury, put team members in vulnerable positions separated from each other in darkness, while something that had already demonstrated violent intent was in the area. Approximately 20 minutes after the team split up to investigate the surrounding vocalizations, a gunshot rang out in the darkness, captured on multiple cameras from different positions and creating a moment that would define why this episode could never be broadcast. The audio from multiple sources clearly captured a single gunshot followed immediately by Buck's voice screaming for everyone to get to his location immediately. The footage shows team members running through dark forest toward Buck's position, with cameras capturing the chaos and fear as everyone tried to navigate through dense woods while not knowing what had happened or whether there was ongoing danger. When cameras reached Buck's location, the footage shows him standing over something on the ground with his rifle still raised, clearly in shock, and Jeff arriving moments later asking what happened. The footage, which has been described by people who have seen it, but which has never been publicly released, apparently shows a large, dark figure lying motionless on the ground, approximately 10 feet from Buck's position. Buck's account, captured on camera in the immediate aftermath, states that he was investigating the vocalizations when the figure charged at him from close range, giving him only seconds to react. He states he feared for his life based on what had happened to Wild Bill and fired one shot at center mass to stop the charge. The figure went down immediately and did not move. The footage from the next several minutes is reportedly the most controversial in the entire episode, showing the team's reaction as they approached the figure to determine what Buck had shot. Multiple cameras captured the scene from different angles as team members used flashlights to examine what was on the ground. According to descriptions from people who have seen the unaired footage, what the cameras revealed was not clearly a known animal, not clearly a person in a costume, but something ambiguous enough that it created massive legal and ethical problems for the network. If Buck had shot an unknown animal, that would create wildlife law violations and potential criminal charges. If he had shot what appeared to be a person, even if that person was in a costume and charging at him, that would create potential manslaughter or assault charges. If he had shot an actual cryptid, that would raise questions about why the body wasn't preserved and turned over to scientific authorities. The ambiguity of what was actually shown on camera made the footage impossible to broadcast without creating catastrophic liability for everyone involved. The production team made the decision to shut down filming immediately and secure the scene. Local authorities were not initially contacted, a decision that would later become extremely controversial. Instead, production supervisors contacted network executives and legal teams who began emergency consultations about what to do with the footage and how to handle the situation. In the 72 hours following the shooting incident, Destination America network executives, production company lawyers, and crisis management consultants engaged in intensive damage control to prevent the Mountain Monsters episode from becoming a public relations disaster and potential legal catastrophe. The first action taken was securing all footage from the investigation under lock and key, with explicit orders that no copies were to be made and no footage was to be reviewed without legal counsel present. All crew members present during the investigation, including the Ames team members and production staff, were required to sign expanded non-disclosure agreements with severe financial penalties for discussing what had occurred during filming. These NDAs reportedly included liquidated damages clauses in the hundreds of thousands of dollars per violation, effectively silencing everyone involved through the threat of financial ruin if they spoke publicly about the banned episode. Wild Bill, who was still recovering from his injuries in the hospital, was visited by network representatives who secured his signature on similar agreements and reportedly offered financial compensation beyond his standard appearance fees in exchange for his cooperation in keeping the incident confidential. The question of what to do about the shooting itself and whether to involve law enforcement created intense internal debate. Legal counsel advised that if what Buck shot was an animal, West Virginia wildlife laws would require reporting the incident and likely result in criminal charges for hunting violations given that the shooting occurred at night, potentially involved an endangered or protected species if it was determined to be an unknown primate, and occurred in an area where hunting may not have been permitted. If what Buck shot appeared to be a person, or could be interpreted as a person in a costume, failure to report the shooting could constitute obstruction of justice or accessory after the fact to a potential crime. The decision was ultimately made to not involve local law enforcement based on the argument that the figure had charged at Buck in what was determined to be legitimate self-defense, that no body could be located when the area was searched the following day during daylight hours, suggesting whatever was shot had retreated and survived the encounter, and that involving authorities would inevitably lead to public disclosure of the footage, which would create the exact liability exposure the network was trying to avoid. This decision, while legally questionable, was based on risk assessment that the potential consequences of reporting were worse than the potential consequences of not reporting. To justify the decision not to report, extensive searches were conducted of the area where the shooting occurred, documented through photographs and video that would serve as evidence that the network had acted reasonably in determining no crime had occurred. These searches found no body, no blood trail, and no physical evidence that anything had been shot and killed. Network executives and legal teams identified multiple independent reasons why the banned Mountain Monsters episode could not be aired under any circumstances, creating a situation where the footage became permanently locked away rather than simply delayed or edited for content. The primary legal concern involved liability for Wild Bill's injuries and the question of whether the network had exercised adequate duty of care in protecting cast members from foreseeable harm. Reality television productions have legal obligations to maintain reasonably safe working conditions for participants, and courts have found networks liable when cast members are injured during filming if it can be shown the production created or failed to mitigate unreasonable risks. Wild Bill's injuries were serious enough that if the episode aired showing the circumstances that led to the attack, it could be used as evidence in a potential lawsuit that the production had knowingly put cast members in dangerous situations for entertainment value. Even if Wild Bill chose not to sue, regulatory agencies or insurance companies could potentially take action based on the documented safety failures. The shooting incident created even more severe legal problems. Regardless of what Buck actually shot, the footage showing a cast member discharging a firearm during production raised questions about weapons protocols, safety procedures, and whether the network could be held responsible for whatever consequences resulted. If the shooting was legally justified self-defense, airing the footage could still create public relations disasters and potentially subject Buck to criminal investigation if prosecutors decided to review the case. If the shooting was not justified, airing footage documenting a potential crime would make the network complicit. The ambiguity of what was shown in the footage made it impossible to defend airing the episode from any angle. Beyond the shooting itself, the footage showing team members arguing about safety and expressing concerns about continuing the investigation would directly contradict the network's position that adequate safety measures were in place. Broadcasting Buck's on-camera statement that continuing the investigation was reckless and could lead to someone being killed, followed immediately by footage of the shooting incident, would create devastating evidence of negligence if legal action was taken. The ethical concerns were equally prohibitive. Destination America marketed Mountain Monsters as entertainment about cryptid hunting, maintaining ambiguity about whether the creatures were real or the show was staged performance. The banned episode's footage was too graphic and too realistic to maintain that ambiguity. If what was shown was real, airing it would be broadcasting actual violence and potential death for entertainment. If what was shown was staged, it would constitute fraud against viewers and potentially violate FCC regulations about disclosure of staged content in unscripted programming. Network standards and practices departments determined the violence shown was too intense for the network's target demographic and time slots regardless of context. For 9 years, the banned Mountain Monsters episode remained locked away with only network executives, legal team members, and participants knowing what the footage contained. The Ames team continued filming subsequent seasons without publicly acknowledging the banned episode, though observers noted format changes after season 2, reducing aggressive cryptid confrontations and increasing safety protocols. Wild Bill recovered from injuries and returned to the show, but was noticeably more cautious and refused to discuss Wirt County when asked by fans. Buck remained with the show but showed less enthusiasm for night investigations and became more vocal about safety concerns during filmed episodes. Then, in March 2023, partial footage from the banned episode appeared on social media platforms and file-sharing sites, uploaded by anonymous sources and spreading rapidly through paranormal investigation communities and Mountain Monsters fan groups before network legal teams could issue takedown notices. The leaked footage was incomplete and lower resolution than broadcast quality, suggesting it had been copied from production files rather than master footage, but showed enough key incidents to confirm years of rumors about why the episode was banned. The leaked material included approximately 8 minutes showing Wild Bill's attack and immediate aftermath with graphic injuries visible. The heated argument between Buck and Trapper about continuing the investigation, with Buck explicitly stating someone would be killed. Audio of the gunshot and chaotic response with team members screaming and running through darkness, and brief, unclear footage of something on the ground that viewers debated endlessly. Notably absent from leaked material was any clear view of the figure Buck shot, suggesting whoever leaked the footage either didn't have access to that specific content or deliberately withheld the most legally problematic material. Destination America issued immediate DMCA takedown notices and released a brief statement acknowledging unreleased Mountain Monsters footage had been leaked without authorization, investigating how the breach occurred, but notably did not deny the footage was authentic or address specific content shown. Ames team members did not comment publicly, presumably bound by non-disclosure agreements, though fans noted Wild Bill's social media presence decreased significantly after the leak and Buck deleted his Facebook account entirely. Trapper spent decades hunting creatures in the Appalachian Mountains that most of the world refused to believe existed. He faced things in those woods that would have ended any other man's investigation before it started, and he went back every time. But in his final days, he said something about one investigation that he had never said about any other, that it scared him, that what the Ames team found during that hunt was something he was not prepared for. Subscribe and stay until the end, because what Trapper revealed changes everything. John Trapper Tice was not a man who frightened easily. That is not a characterization built from the edited version of him that Mountain Monsters presented to its audience across 8 seasons of television. It is a characterization built from the full body of evidence of how he lived, the decades of hunting and fieldwork in some of the most remote and unforgiving terrain in the eastern United States, the community relationships he maintained across generations of Appalachian families who trusted him with accounts of experiences they would never share with an outsider, and the operational culture he built within the Ames team that treated the phenomena they were hunting not as entertainment, but as a genuine and serious subject requiring genuine and serious investigation. Trapper grew up in the tradition of Appalachian mountain culture that understands the wilderness as a place inhabited by things that do not appear in any official catalog and that has never required outside validation for that understanding. The oral tradition of the region he operated in, the accounts passed down through families across generations describing creatures, presences, and phenomena in the mountains that defy the frameworks of mainstream biology and conventional experience, was not exotic folklore to Trapper. It was the informational context within which he had operated his entire adult life. He brought that context to Mountain Monsters, and it gave the show something that no production budget or network development process could manufacture: an investigator whose engagement with the subject was rooted in a relationship with the land and its people that predated cameras by several decades. The Ames team he assembled and led reflected that same quality. These were not paranormal television personalities recruited for their on-camera charisma. They were men with specific skills and specific backgrounds whose value to the investigation was practical rather than presentational. Trapper understood what each of them brought to the field and deployed those capabilities with the methodical deliberateness of someone who had been thinking about how to find these creatures long before anyone offered him a television show to do it. What made him exceptional as an investigator was not his willingness to go into dangerous terrain in the dark, though that willingness was genuine and documented across every season of the show. It was his ability to read the Appalachian landscape, the signs, the silences, the behavioral indicators that something significant had passed through an area or was currently present in it, with a fluency that came from a lifetime of immersion in that environment. He was not startled by the mountains. He was at home in them in a way that went beyond familiarity into something closer to belonging, which is why what he said about the investigation that scared him most carries a weight that nothing in the Mountain Monsters broadcast record approaches. A man who belonged to those mountains, who had spent decades in them encountering things that most people would find terrifying without ever describing himself as frightened, identified one investigation as the exception. That exception is what this video is about. The broadcast version of Mountain Monsters presented its investigations within a format that the paranormal television landscape had established. Dramatic music, night vision sequences, constructed traps that almost but never quite caught anything, and a tone that balanced genuine fieldwork with the entertainment requirements of cable television. That format served the show well commercially across 8 seasons and built a dedicated audience that followed the Ames team through the full range of Appalachian cryptid territory. What it did not fully convey was the nature of what the investigation was actually accumulating beneath the surface of the broadcast material. The Appalachian mountain range is one of the oldest geological formations on the North American continent and one of the most consistently documented regions in the history of American cryptid and paranormal encounter reports. The density of the forest, the isolation of the communities embedded within it, and the cultural tradition of those communities, which has never treated anomalous experience as something requiring outside confirmation before it can be considered real, has produced a body of encounter testimony that stretches back further than any other comparable region in the country. Trapper understood this body of testimony not as a catalog of claims to be investigated, but as an accumulated record of observation from people who had been living alongside whatever inhabits those mountains for generations. The Ames team's investigations were, in this framing, not discovery operations. They were documentation operations. They were going into terrain where the local population already knew something was there, and attempting to produce evidence of sufficient quality to bring that knowledge into a form that the outside world could engage with. That distinction matters for understanding what the investigation that scared Trapper most actually produced. The show had documented compelling evidence across multiple seasons, physical signs of large unknown creatures, eyewitness accounts from credible local sources, audio recordings of vocalizations that did not match any known animal in the regional wildlife catalog. None of it had crossed the specific threshold that Trapper maintained in his own private assessment of the investigation's finding, the threshold between evidence that pointed towards something and evidence that confirmed it. The investigation he identified in his final days as the one that scared him most was the investigation that crossed that threshold, not because it produced better physical evidence than prior investigations, though what the cameras documented during that investigation exceeded anything the show had previously captured, but because of what the evidence implied about the nature of what the Ames team had been hunting across all the prior seasons, and what that thing's relationship to the human communities living in its territory actually was. To understand why the investigation Trapper identified as his most frightening encounter matters beyond its immediate evidence. It is necessary to understand the broader tradition within which the Ames team was operating, the Appalachian cultural and historical context that informed Trapper's understanding of what lived in those mountains and what its presence meant for the people who shared that territory with it. The Appalachian mountain communities that Mountain Monsters drew its witness testimony from are not communities that discovered the creatures they described through the show's investigation process. They are communities that have maintained continuous awareness of those creatures across generations of coexistence that has not always been peaceful, and that has produced a body of transmitted knowledge about the behavior, the capabilities, and the boundaries of the beings that inhabit the deep mountain terrain alongside the human population. That transmitted knowledge takes different forms in different communities. Some of it is embedded in the hunting and land use traditions of families that have worked specific sections of mountain territory for generations, knowledge about which areas are avoided, which times of year bring increased signs of non-human presence, and what behaviors indicate that the boundary between the human and non-human territories is being approached or crossed. Some of it exists in the religious and spiritual frameworks that Appalachian mountain culture has developed across its history, frameworks that treat the presence of powerful non-human beings in the wilderness as a theological reality rather than a folkloric tradition, and that have specific doctrinal positions about the nature of those beings and the appropriate human relationship to them. Trapper was embedded in this tradition in a way that shaped every operational decision the Ames team made in the field, the locations he chose to investigate, the local sources he consulted before entering new territory, and the behavioral lines he established for the team during active hunts all reflected a knowledge base that went significantly deeper than anything the broadcast episodes made visible. The investigation he identified in his final days as his most frightening experience was frightening in part because of what it produced on camera, but it was frightening in larger part because of how what it produced on camera aligned with specific elements of the Appalachian traditional knowledge that Trapper had been carrying for decades, elements that he had hoped, across all the prior investigations, would not be confirmed in the direct and unambiguous form the evidence from that hunt produced. He had spent his career operating in the knowledge that the mountains contained something extraordinary. The investigation that scared him most was the one that told him specifically what that something was, and the answer aligned with the most serious and consequential interpretation of the Appalachian tradition, not the folkloric edge of it, but the theological core. The investigation Trapper identified as the most frightening of his career did not begin with any indication that it would end differently from the dozens of hunts the Ames team had conducted across the prior seasons. The location was in territory the team knew, a section of Appalachian mountain terrain that had generated consistent reports of anomalous creature activity across an extended period, and that had produced credible witness testimony from local sources whose relationship with Trapper gave their accounts a weight that anonymous reports would not have carried. The decision to investigate that specific location at that specific time was driven by an escalation in the reported activity that Trapper's local contacts had been describing over the preceding months, an escalation that was unusual not in the category of phenomenon being reported, but in its frequency and its proximity to the areas of human habitation at the edge of the deep mountain territory where the activity was normally concentrated. Something had moved closer. Whatever had been operating in the deep terrain of that mountain section was generating signs of its presence in areas it had not previously occupied, and the people living nearest to those areas were communicating a level of concern that Trapper took seriously, precisely because these were not people who communicated concern about mountain phenomena casually. The Ames team entered the investigation location in the early evening with their standard equipment configuration and the expectation that the elevated activity reports would translate into a productive investigation night. What they encountered within the first 2 hours exceeded the preliminary assessment of the location's activity level in ways that the team's prior experience in comparable terrain had not fully prepared them for. The signs of recent presence in the investigation area were not the ambiguous indicators that require expert interpretation to identify as significant. They were immediate and unmistakable, physical evidence of something large operating in the area within a time frame that placed its presence in the investigation zone concurrent with the team's arrival. The forest behavior was the first indicator that registered across the full team simultaneously. The ambient sound environment of a mountain forest at night is one that every member of the Ames team had extensive experience reading. The baseline of insect, bird, and small animal activity that provides a continuous acoustic map of what is and is not present in the surrounding terrain. That baseline shut down within 30 minutes of the team's entry into the investigation area in a pattern that Trapper later described as the most complete and rapid cessation of ambient sound he had experienced in decades of mountain fieldwork, not a gradual thinning of background noise as the team's presence registered with the wildlife in the surrounding area, a simultaneous and total shutdown that covered a radius of forest significantly larger than the team's immediate position, the kind of acoustic displacement that indicates the presence of something that the local wildlife recognizes as a predator of sufficient significance to trigger a unified silence response across multiple species at once. The footage from the investigation that Trapper identified as his most frightening experience documents a sequence of events across approximately 4 hours of active fieldwork that the Mountain Monsters production had never captured in any comparable form across the prior seasons of the show. The opening phase of the investigation footage is consistent with what the broadcast episodes had established as the show's standard field documentation. The team moving through the investigation area, calling out observations, responding to instrument readings, and establishing the baseline evidence picture before the active phase of the hunt began. What the cameras began capturing in the second hour of the investigation is where the footage diverges from anything in the show's prior record. The first significant moment documented on camera occurs without any dramatic buildup or visible trigger. A sudden and complete reorientation of every member of the Ames team toward the same direction simultaneously, without verbal communication between them, in response to something the audio track captures in the infrasound range below the threshold of comfortable human hearing. The team's physical response to that sound, the stiffening of posture, the immediate halt of all movement, the particular quality of stillness that experienced mountain hunters adopt when they have registered a predator stimulus, is visible on camera without any of the standard mountain monster's dramatic framing around it. This was not a television reaction. The cameras then captured what happened when the team advanced toward the source of the infrasound. In the tree line approximately 80 yards from the team's position, movement became visible across multiple camera feeds simultaneously. Not the movement of a single entity passing through the frame, but a pattern of movement that indicated multiple presences repositioning in the dark timber in a coordinated manner that the team's experienced hunters recognized immediately as deliberate rather than incidental. What those multiple presences did over the following 90 minutes, the coordinated movement, the vocalizations that the audio equipment captured with a clarity and a complexity that exceeded anything the show had previously recorded, and the specific behavioral pattern that Trapper later described as the detail that frightened him most, is documented on camera in a form that left no member of the team with any ambiguity about what they were experiencing. The broadcast audience saw a version of that night. What they saw was not the version the cameras captured. Across 8 seasons of Mountain Monsters and decades of fieldwork in the Appalachian Mountains before the show existed, Trapper had developed a working understanding of the behavioral boundaries that defined his relationship with whatever inhabited the deep mountain territory his team investigated. Those boundaries had held across every prior investigation, an implicit negotiation between the human presence of the Ames team and the non-human presence of the creatures they were hunting, in which both parties maintained a specific distance that neither crossed without the investigation reaching a natural conclusion. The moment Trapper identified in his final days as the moment that frightened him most was the moment during the investigation documented in this video when that boundary was crossed. Not by the Ames team advancing further into the territory of whatever they were hunting. By whatever they were hunting, advancing into theirs. The cameras documented the moment the coordinated presences in the tree line began moving toward the team's position, rather than maintaining the parallel tracking behavior they had been exhibiting across the prior portion of the investigation. Trapper's response to that movement, visible on camera before any verbal communication between team members, was the response of a man whose decades of experience in those mountains had just told him something that his prior experience had not prepared him to process in real time. He had spent years operating on the understanding that the creatures the Ames team hunted were aware of the human investigators in their territory, were capable of monitoring and responding to that presence with a sophistication that went beyond animal instinct, and maintained a consistent behavioral pattern of avoidance that kept the investigations within a range of danger his experience could account for. What advanced out of that tree line toward the team's position that night was not behaving within that pattern, and what Trapper saw in the quality of that advance, in the deliberateness of it, the patience of it, and the specific directional intention it communicated, was the detail he referenced in his final days as the thing he could never fully set aside after that investigation was over. It was not the size of what came toward them. It was not the speed. It was the intelligence the advance communicated, an intelligence that understood exactly what the Ames team was, exactly what their equipment was capable of documenting, and exactly how close it could come before the investigation would break. It came to that line, and it held there, and it looked at Trapper with the full weight of something that had been in those mountains long before any human institution had been keeping records about what lived there. He never said what looked back at him from the dark, but in his final days he said that whatever it was, it knew him, and that it had known him for longer than he had known it. The question of why Trapper maintained silence about the investigation that scared him most across the years between when it occurred and his final days is not a simple one. The simplest component of the answer is the one that applies to any person operating within a television production framework. The contractual and institutional constraints that govern what cast members of a cable television show can and cannot say publicly about their experiences on that show and the evidence those experiences produced. Those constraints were real, and Trapper operated within them as every Mountain Monsters cast member did. But contractual constraint alone does not account for the specific character of the silence Trapper maintained about this investigation. He was not a man who found silence easy when he believed something important needed to be said. And across his public life, he had demonstrated a willingness to push against institutional boundaries when the subject matter was significant enough to justify it. The silence about this investigation was different in character from the ordinary professional discretion he applied to the show's unreleased material. It was a silence that the people closest to him during the final years of his life have described as deliberate in a way that went beyond network compliance. A decision he had made about this specific investigation that was rooted not in contractual obligation, but in a personal reckoning with what the investigation had produced and what saying it publicly would mean. Part of that reckoning was theological. Trapper's relationship to the Appalachian religious tradition, the specific framework within which the communities he worked with understood the presence of powerful non-human beings in the mountain territory, had been shaped by a lifetime of encounter with evidence that pushed against the boundaries of what that framework could comfortably contain. The investigation that scared him most had pushed through those boundaries in a way that forced a personal confrontation with the most serious implications of what he believed about the nature of the things he had spent his career hunting. He was not ready to say those implications out loud for most of the years that followed the investigation. What changed in his final days was the same thing that changes the calculation for anyone approaching the end of their life about what they can afford to leave unsaid. The professional consequences of speaking no longer carried the weight they had. The personal reckoning he had been conducting privately about what the investigation meant and what it implied about the nature of the beings the Ames team had encountered across all the prior seasons had reached a conclusion, and the people he trusted most, the individuals who were present with him in those final days and who have shared his words in the time since, heard him say what he had spent years deciding how to say. He said it was real. He said it was not an animal. He said what came toward them that night in the tree line knew exactly what it was doing. And he said that the thing that frightened him most was not what it was. It was that it had always been there, and it had always known they were coming, and it had been deciding for a very long time how close it was willing to let them get. Mountain Monsters has been chasing something through the forests and hollows of Appalachia for 3 full seasons. The Ames team has tracked it, set traps for it, and come closer to it than any investigation crew has ever gotten to an unidentified creature in the history of paranormal and cryptid television. But they have never been able to say with certainty that what they were chasing was real. Until now. What the team confirmed during the final days of their most recent investigation is something that changes not just the trajectory of this show, but the entire conversation around what is living in the mountains of the American East. If you are new here, subscribe now, because this is the confirmation that 3 seasons of evidence was always building toward. To understand the full weight of what the Mountain Monsters team just confirmed, you need to understand what this show is, what it has been building across 3 seasons of pursuit, and why a confirmation from the Ames team carries a different kind of credibility than a similar claim from almost any other cryptid investigation program currently operating in this space. Mountain Monsters is not a show that was designed around a single creature or a single region. It is a show built around a team of experienced outdoorsmen, hunters, and trackers from the Appalachian region whose relationship with the mountains they investigate is not that of outside researchers arriving with equipment and theories. These are men who grew up in these mountains, who learned to read terrain and animal sign and environmental evidence from people who had been doing it for generations before them, and whose collective knowledge of what the Appalachian wilderness normally contains and normally produces is the baseline against which everything unusual they encounter is measured. Trapper, Buck, Huckleberry, Wild Bill, Jeff, and Willie have between them an accumulation of field experience in some of the most remote and least documented terrain in the eastern United States that no academic institution and no professional research organization can replicate through conventional means. When they say something is out there, they are not saying it from a position of theoretical interest or investigative enthusiasm. They are saying it from a position of direct, repeated physical engagement with evidence that their combined decades of experience in that environment tell them is real. The creature they have been pursuing across 3 seasons of Mountain Monsters emerged from initial witness accounts that the team treated with the same practical skepticism they apply to all incoming reports, filtering them against their knowledge of what the terrain can produce naturally before committing to an investigation. What moved the creature from a collection of witness accounts into a sustained multi-season pursuit was the physical evidence the team began accumulating from the first investigation, evidence that could not be attributed to known animals, that was consistent across locations and witnesses who had no connection to each other, and that pointed towards something operating in the Appalachian wilderness at a scale and with a behavioral profile that the team's collective experience had no existing category for. 3 seasons later, the Ames team has more physical evidence, more documented encounters, and more accumulated testimony from credible mountain witnesses than any previous cryptid investigation in the show's history. And now they have something more than evidence. They have confirmation. The confirmation that the Mountain Monsters team just delivered did not arrive without context. It arrived at the end of 3 seasons of investigation that produced a body of evidence so consistent and so specific that the confirmation, when it came, felt to the people who had been following the pursuit closely, not like a surprise, but like the inevitable destination of a line of evidence that had been pointing in one direction from the beginning. The first season of the creature's pursuit established the foundational profile. The initial witness reports that brought the Ames team to the region described encounters with something large, bipedal in some of its observed movements, but capable of moving on all 4 limbs at speeds inconsistent with any known large animal in the Appalachian ecosystem. Witnesses described a creature that was aware of being observed, that responded to the presence of investigators with behavior that suggested intelligence rather than simple animal flight response, and that left physical evidence at encounter sites that the Ames team's trackers found compelling from the first examination. Footprints that were outside the size range of any documented species in the region. Vegetation disturbance patterns that indicated something moving through dense terrain at a speed and with a physical profile that the team's hunters identified as unlike anything they had tracked before. And in several locations, structural formations, deliberate arrangements of natural materials that Trapper and the senior members of the team assessed as intentional rather than environmental in origin. The second season deepened the profile and raised the stakes. The team returned to the region with refined equipment and a more specific understanding of the creature's apparent territory, and what they found during that season's investigations pushed the pursuit from compelling to urgent. The creature was not simply present in the terrain. It was responding to the team's investigation in ways that indicated it was tracking them as actively as they were tracking it, appearing at locations ahead of the team's arrival, leaving evidence at positions that seemed designed to be found, and on at least 2 occasions during second season investigations, making direct physical contact with the investigation in ways that produced undeniable evidence of proximity that the team had not previously achieved. The third season was the season that produced the confirmation. The team arrived with a level of preparation and a depth of prior evidence that allowed them to operate with a precision and a focus that the earlier seasons had been building toward. And what they encountered during the final investigation of the third season was something that the accumulated context of everything that had come before made impossible to dismiss or explain away. Understanding what the Mountain Monsters team confirmed requires understanding what the creature they have been pursuing actually is, or more precisely what the 3 seasons of evidence suggest it is, because the creature at the center of this pursuit does not fit cleanly into any of the existing categories that Appalachian cryptid investigation has previously worked with, and does not match the profile of any of the more widely discussed unknown animals that have been reported in the region over the past century. The physical profile assembled from the accumulated evidence of 3 seasons of investigation describes something that is significantly larger than any known predator in the Appalachian ecosystem. The footprint evidence, collected from multiple locations across a substantial geographic range, indicates a creature of considerable height and mass, with a foot structure that the Ames team's trackers have described as unlike any known animal print they have encountered in decades of work in that terrain. The stride length documented in track sequences found during the second and third season investigations suggests an animal capable of covering ground at speeds that are inconsistent with its apparent physical mass when measured against the movement capabilities of comparable known animals. The behavioral evidence is in some ways more significant than the physical. The creature has demonstrated across 3 seasons of investigation a consistent pattern of intelligent response to the Ames team's investigation activities that goes beyond the reactive behavior of even the most cognitively complex known animals in its environment. It has altered its routes in response to the team's trap placements in ways that suggest it understood the purpose of those structures. It has appeared at locations that the team had identified as strategically significant in ways that suggest it was monitoring the investigation's progress, and it has left evidence at encounter sites that the team's most experienced trackers interpret as deliberate communication, though what specifically is being communicated and to what purpose remains one of the central unanswered questions of the entire pursuit. The witness testimony that has accumulated around the creature across the 3 seasons of investigation is notable for its geographic spread and its consistency. Reports have come from witnesses in multiple counties across 2 states, from people with no connection to each other and no awareness of other reports, describing encounters with the same creature profile with a specificity and a consistency that the Ames team has found striking. Witnesses who have encountered the creature in the field describe an experience that is different in character from encounters with known large animals, a sense of being evaluated rather than simply threatened, of being the subject of something's attention in a way that feels purposeful rather than accidental. The investigation that produced the confirmation was the 3rd season's culminating effort, the investigation the Ames team had been building toward, across 2 full seasons of accumulated evidence and refined understanding of the creature's territory and behavior. The preparation for this investigation was more extensive than anything the team had undertaken in the previous seasons, reflecting both the seriousness with which they were approaching the final push and the specific intelligence they had gathered about the creature's current location and movement patterns. Trapper had spent weeks in the period leading up to the investigation reviewing everything the 3 seasons had produced, working with the team's trackers to build the most complete picture available of the creature's range, its den locations, its seasonal movement patterns, and the specific behavioral triggers that had generated the closest encounters of the previous seasons. The result was an investigation plan that was more targeted and more specifically calibrated to what the evidence suggested than anything the show had previously attempted. The investigation began with the Ames team splitting into smaller units to cover more ground simultaneously, a tactical decision driven by the 2nd season discovery that the creature was capable of monitoring the team's movements and adjusting its position accordingly when the full group moved together through its territory. The first hours of the investigation produced evidence that immediately confirmed the team was in the right area. Track evidence fresh enough to indicate the creature had been in the immediate vicinity within hours of the team's arrival. Environmental disturbance in the vegetation consistent with the movement profile that had been documented across the previous seasons, and audio evidence captured on the team's recording equipment and heard directly by field members that Trapper and Buck both identified immediately as consistent with vocalizations attributed to the creature by witnesses from the 1st season onward. But it was the encounter in the 3rd hour of the investigation that produced the confirmation in a location deep in the terrain that the team's evidence suggested was central to the creature's current reign, under conditions that the combination of their preparation and the creature's own behavior had created in a way that neither side of the encounter had entirely anticipated. The moment of confirmation came in the way that the most significant moments in the mountain monsters investigation always come, not through a planned encounter at a prepared trap site, but through the unpredictable intersection of the team's carefully positioned presence and the creature's own movement through its territory, an intersection that the preparation had made possible, but that the specific form it took was not something the team had scripted or anticipated. The team members who were in the field when it happened have described the moment in accounts that are consistent in their core details and that convey, even through the filters of post-event recounting, the immediate and undeniable character of what the encounter produced. What the team witnessed was not a partial view, not a fleeting glimpse at the edge of camera range, not the ambiguous impression of something large moving through dense vegetation in low light. What they witnessed was a direct and sustained encounter with the creature at a distance and under conditions of visibility that made the kind of misidentification that skeptics apply to most cryptid encounter reports genuinely impossible for people with the combined field experience the Ames team brings to an investigation. Trapper, who has spent more time in Appalachian terrain than any other member of the team and whose capacity for disciplined assessment of what he is seeing in the field is the product of a lifetime of serious hunting and tracking, described what he witnessed in terms that he has not used about any previous mountain monsters encounter. He was not hedging. He was not framing his account in the conditional language that investigators use when they are describing something they believe they saw but cannot fully verify. He was describing something he saw clearly, under conditions that his experience told him were sufficient for a definitive assessment, and his assessment was definitive. The creature the Ames team has been pursuing across 3 seasons of investigation is real. It exists. It is present in the Appalachian wilderness in the region the team has been investigating, and it is something that the existing categories of known Appalachian wildlife do not account for. The confirmation encounter did not produce only eyewitness testimony from the Ames team. It produced physical and recorded evidence that the team collected during and immediately after the encounter. Evidence that is described by the people who have reviewed it as the most significant single body of material the Mountain Monsters investigation has generated across its entire 3-season run. The camera footage from the encounter, captured under the field conditions of a nighttime investigation in dense Appalachian terrain, shows what the team witnessed with a clarity that reflects both the quality of the equipment they brought to this investigation and the proximity of the encounter. People who have reviewed the footage describe it as the clearest visual documentation of the creature that the investigation has produced. Not perfect by the standards of a controlled photographic session, but sufficient under the assessment of the team members who were present and who have the experiential baseline to evaluate what they are seeing to constitute genuine documentation of an animal that is not a known species. The track evidence collected from the encounter site in the hours immediately following is described as the best the investigation has produced. Prints left in substrate conditions that preserved detail at a level not achieved in previous seasons, at a scale consistent with the physical profile the 3 seasons of evidence had suggested, and in a sequence that documents the creature's movement through and away from the encounter location in a way that allows a clear reading of its gait, speed, and direction of travel. Biological material collected from the site, from locations where the creature's proximity to vegetation and terrain surfaces during the encounter created opportunities for collection that previous investigations had not produced, has been submitted for analysis. The results of that analysis are not yet publicly available, but the collection itself represents something the investigation has been working toward across 3 seasons. Physical material from the creature that can be subjected to scientific examination, independent of the testimony and observational evidence that has constituted the bulk of the investigation's documentation to this point. Audio recordings from the encounter document vocalizations from the creature during the period of direct contact that represent the clearest and most sustained audio evidence the investigation has produced, and that the team's members have described as unlike any known animal vocalization in the Appalachian ecosystem. The confirmation that the Ames team delivered at the end of 3 seasons of investigation was not news to the people who live closest to the terrain where the creature has been documented. In the communities scattered through the mountains and hollows of the region where the investigation has been centered, the creature's existence has never been a matter of serious debate among the people whose daily lives put them in direct contact with the wilderness where it operates. It has been a fact of the local landscape, acknowledged in the practical and undemonstrative way that rural mountain communities acknowledge facts about the natural world they share, without drama and without the need for outside validation, because the evidence of direct experience has always been sufficient for people who trust what they have seen with their own eyes in terrain they have known their entire lives. The witnesses who provided the initial reports that brought the Ames team to the region represent only a fraction of the people in those communities who have direct personal experience with the creature. The ones who came forward did so with the particular combination of conviction and reluctance that characterizes people who know what they saw and are aware that saying so publicly invites a response from the outside world that does not reflect the seriousness with which the experience deserves to be treated. The ones who did not come forward are more numerous, and their reasons for staying quiet are the same reasons that have kept this category of knowledge confined to local communities across the entire documented history of Appalachian cryptid reports. You do not talk about what you have seen in the mountains to people who have not seen it, because the conversation that follows is not worth having. The Ames team's 3 seasons of investigation changed that dynamic in the communities closest to the creature's territory in ways that are visible to anyone paying attention to how the local response to the show has evolved across its run. In the first season, the team encountered the careful and measured engagement that outsider investigators always encounter in these communities. The willingness to share what is directly relevant and the withholding of everything that could be dismissed or ridiculed. By the 3rd season, something had shifted. The teams demonstrated seriousness, their field credibility, and their consistent treatment of local witnesses with the respect that comes from investigators who share a fundamental orientation toward the natural world, had opened channels of communication that produced information the investigation could not have accessed any other way. The confirmation the team delivered is built in part on that information, on knowledge that had been held in these communities for generations and that became available to the investigation only because the investigation had earned the trust of the people who held it. The mountain monster's confirmation does not exist in isolation. It lands in a context defined by decades of documented cryptid reports from the Appalachian region, by a history of investigation that has produced compelling evidence without achieving the threshold of confirmation, and by a broader cultural and scientific conversation about unknown animals in North America that has never been resolved in either direction with the definitiveness that a genuine confirmation of this kind demands. The Appalachian region has the longest and most densely documented history of unknown creature reports in the eastern United States. From the earliest written records of European settlement through the current era of trail cameras and smartphone documentation, the mountains have produced a consistent and geographically stable body of encounter reports that cannot be accounted for by known wildlife and that have never been fully explained by the misidentification and hoax explanations that mainstream commentary defaults to when these reports are addressed at all. The Mountain Monsters investigation, across its 3 seasons of pursuit, has been the most sustained and most methodologically serious field investigation of a specific Appalachian unknown animal that the documented history of this field contains. The Ames team's approach, grounded in the practical field skills of experienced hunters and trackers, rather than in the technological frameworks of academic or institutional research, has produced a body of evidence that is different in character from what previous investigation approaches have generated, and that is more difficult to dismiss precisely because it comes from people whose relationship with the natural world is practical and immediate, rather than theoretical. The confirmation they have delivered changes the terms of the broader conversation in ways that will take time to fully register. Within the cryptid investigation community, it represents a threshold that has not previously been crossed with this level of documented support, a shift from compelling evidence to confirmed reality that the community has been working toward across decades of field investigation. For the broader scientific and cultural conversation, it raises questions that cannot be indefinitely deferred. If the Ames team's confirmation is sustained by the biological evidence currently under analysis, the implications extend well beyond the specific creature they have been chasing. They extend to what the existence of that creature says about what else may be living in terrain that human investigation has consistently underestimated. The confirmation the Mountain Monsters team delivered at the end of 3 seasons of pursuit is not an ending. It is a threshold. And what lies on the other side of it is a set of questions and obligations that the investigation, the show, and the mountain communities where this creature lives are only beginning to reckon with. For the Ames team, the confirmation changes the character of everything that comes next. 3 seasons of investigation have been oriented around the question of whether the creature is real. That question is now answered. The questions that replace it are harder and more consequential. Where does the creature's range extend? How many individuals exist? What does the intelligence the team has documented across 3 seasons of behavioral observation imply about how the creature should be approached going forward? The biological material collected from the confirmation encounter site is the most immediate piece of the investigation's next chapter. When those results become available, they will either force a formal scientific response from institutions that have declined to engage with this category of evidence, or they will raise new questions that push the investigation further. The mountain communities closest to the creature's territory are watching what happens next with the quiet attention of people who have never doubted what was out there and who have a personal stake in how the outside world responds. 3 seasons of pursuit brought the Ames team to this moment. What they do with it is the investigation that is just beginning. Mountain Monsters has investigated hundreds of locations, faced bears, dangerous terrain, extreme weather, but one episode never aired. September 2019, deep in Kentucky mountains hunting the Yahoo, something went horribly wrong. The crew was attacked, not scared, attacked. Wild Bill hit by rock, cracked rib. Huckleberry grabbed and thrown 5 feet. Marcus's arm slashed, 3 parallel cuts. 4 crew members hospitalized in one night, all captured on camera. Subscribe because Travel Channel banned this episode permanently. The footage is too violent, too real, too disturbing for television. Creatures charged them. Physical contact, documented injuries, medical records prove it. This wasn't entertainment, this was survival, the most violent cryptid encounter ever filmed, and the network decided you should never see it. This is what really happened during the banned Mountain Monsters episode, and why some hunts aren't worth the risk. Devil's Creek Hollow sits in the remote mountains of Pike County, eastern Kentucky, deep in Appalachian territory. The area is accessible only by rough logging roads that wind through dense forest. Steep ridges surround the hollow. Cave systems penetrate the mountains. The nearest town is 40 minutes away on treacherous roads. Cell phone service doesn't exist. The local population is sparse and secretive about what lives in those mountains. The Yahoo is a regional cryptid reported for generations across Appalachia. Unlike the typically shy Pacific Northwest Bigfoot, the Yahoo is known for extreme territorial aggression. Described as 7 to 8 feet tall and covered in reddish-brown hair, it's blamed for multiple livestock killings over decades. Several hunters have reported being chased from the area. One hunter was hospitalized in the 1990s after an encounter, though he refused to discuss details. Locals genuinely fear Devil's Creek Hollow. Many won't enter after dark. In August 2019, multiple recent sightings reached the Ames team. A local farmer's cattle were mutilated in ways that didn't match bear or cougar attacks. Strange vocalizations were recorded by campers. Massive tracks measuring 19 inches were found near the creek. Elaborate tree structures appeared overnight. The pattern suggested an active, aggressive creature. Desperate locals contacted mountain monsters directly, asking for help. Before the investigation began, warning signs appeared. Local residents warned the team repeatedly, "Don't go up there after dark. That thing don't run from people. It hunts people." Most significantly, a Native American elder visited their base camp. "You're making a mistake," he told Buck directly. "This one is different. It's territorial and violent. You should leave." The team dismissed the warnings as superstition and local fear. The full Ames team deployed for the investigation. Buck Lowe led as team leader. Wild Bill, Huckleberry, Jeff Headley, and Willie McQuillian comprised the core team. The production crew totaled 8 people, including multiple camera operators, a sound technician, and a producer on site. They brought complete equipment: thermal imaging, night vision, audio recorders, trail cameras, and communication gear. The investigation plan covered 3 nights. Night 1 for reconnaissance and evidence gathering. Night 2 for building traps and setting cameras. Night 3 for active hunting. Base camp was established at the hollow's entrance. Teams would split coverage for efficiency and coordinate via radio. Medical kits were on standby as standard procedure. From the beginning, the atmosphere felt wrong. Wild Bill commented immediately, "This place feels wrong." The forest was unnaturally quiet with no bird sounds or insect noise. An oppressive feeling hung in the air. Even experienced crew members felt nervous. But Buck decided to proceed. "We've handled worse," he said confidently. They hadn't handled anything like what was waiting for them in Devil's Creek Hollow. At 8 p.m., the team split into 2 groups. Buck, Wild Bill, and Willie headed north toward the ridge. Huckleberry, Jeff, and a camera operator took the south approach through the valley. The producer and remaining crew stayed at base camp. Radio check confirmed communication was working. The sun was setting fast in the hollow and temperature was dropping rapidly. Everyone felt uneasy but proceeded anyway. By 8:45, Buck's team discovered massive footprints crossing a muddy section near the creek. The prints measured 19 inches long with 5 distinct toes. Deep impressions suggested something weighing over 600 pounds. The stride length indicated 7 to 8 foot steps between prints, too large for human, too humanoid for bear. Buck examined them closely. "These are the biggest I've ever seen, and they're fresh, maybe within the last hour." At 9:15, they found elaborate tree structures, 8-foot logs stacked deliberately in patterns, fresh breaks on branches, saplings bent and woven together. These structures were far more complex than typical Bigfoot markers. They suggested high intelligence and very recent activity. "Something built this today," Buck said quietly. The realization was unsettling. The first unusual occurrence came at 9:30. Loud crashing sounds erupted from the brush approximately 50 yards from the team. Something large was moving parallel to their position, keeping pace as they walked. Wild Bill stopped the team. "Something's tracking us." They listened carefully. The crashing stopped immediately when they stopped. When the team resumed walking, the sounds resumed, matching their pace exactly. By 9:50, deep guttural howls echoed from the ridge above them. The sound was unlike any animal they recognized. Not bear, not cougar, not coyote. Before they could process it, a second howl answered from the opposite direction. The team realized with growing dread that they were positioned between at least 2 of them. Huckleberry's team radioed that they were hearing the same vocalizations coming from multiple directions around their position. "They're communicating about us," Jeff said nervously. Huckleberry scanned with the thermal camera at 10:10. Multiple large heat signatures appeared on the screen. At least 3, possibly 4 distinct sources. They were moving in a coordinated pattern, staying just outside clear visual range at approximately 200 yards out. The signatures were circling both teams systematically. "They're surrounding us," Huckleberry reported over radio, his voice tense. Buck made an immediate decision. He radioed both teams. "Everyone back to base camp. Slow and steady, stay together." This wasn't panic, but tactical retreat. He didn't want teams separated with coordinated creatures watching their every move. Between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m., the team settled into camp for the night. Tents were set up in a clearing with the generator running to power lights and equipment. A perimeter was established with portable lights. Buck and Wild Bill took the first watch while the rest of the team tried to sleep. The forest remained eerily quiet, with no normal night sounds whatsoever. At 1:15 a.m., the generator suddenly died. All lights went out immediately, plunging the camp into complete darkness. Buck went to investigate and found the fuel line deliberately cut with a clean slice, not animal damage. "Someone or something sabotaged this," he announced. The team went on high alert immediately. Within minutes, flashlights revealed multiple sets of eyes reflecting from the tree line. They completely surrounded the camp from at least 5 or 6 positions. The eyes were 8 to 9 feet off the ground, far too high for any normal animal. They just watched without approaching. The team armed themselves and formed a defensive circle. The eyes would disappear when flashlights pointed directly at them, then reappear in different locations. They were moving around the perimeter, testing the camp's response. This was intelligent, calculated behavior. "They're hunting us," Wild Bill said quietly, "testing our defenses." At 1:35, large rocks began being thrown into camp from multiple directions. The rocks landed near tents but weren't hitting anyone deliberately. This was intimidation. One rock the size of a softball landed 3 feet from a camera operator. The crew was starting to panic. At 1:42, camera operator Marcus went to his tent to grab equipment. The team heard him scream, "Something grabbed me!" Everyone rushed over to find Marcus pale and shaking violently. 3 parallel scratches ran down his arm, bleeding. He explained that something had grabbed his arm from outside the tent and pulled him backward. The grip was incredibly strong. He pulled free and saw a massive hand covered in dark hair before it disappeared. The medic examined Marcus immediately. The scratches were 3 parallel marks, 4 inches long each, deep enough to draw blood. The spacing suggested a very large hand, not bear claws, not human nails, something in between. The team pulled everyone into the center of camp. No one was allowed near the perimeter. Buck tried to radio for extraction, but communications were dead. The satellite phone was also not working. They were completely cut off from the outside with no way to call for help. The generator was sabotaged. Communications were disabled. They were surrounded by multiple intelligent creatures showing coordinated behavior and willingness to make physical contact. From 2 a.m. until 5:15, when dawn finally broke, the team huddled together. Constant sounds came from the perimeter, heavy footsteps circling, breathing audible in the darkness. Occasional glimpses of massive figures moving just beyond the light. No one slept. Everyone was terrified. When first light came, the creatures melted back into the forest. Examination of the perimeter revealed dozens of massive footprints surrounding the entire camp. They had been playing with the team all night. Morning daylight revealed the full extent of the night's events. The generator fuel line showed a deep, deliberate slash. Multiple equipment items were moved, knocked over, or damaged. Food supplies were scattered across camp. The message was clear: we can reach anything. Footprint casts were made from the clearest prints. They measured 18 to 20 inches long, with depth suggesting 500 to 700 pounds. At least 6 different sets were identified, proving multiple individuals working together in coordinated patterns around the camp. Marcus's scratches were cleaned, bandaged, and photographed extensively. The spacing between marks measured 3 inches. The depth was a 1/4 inch into his skin. Pattern analysis showed 4 fingers plus thumb with a hand span of 9 to 10 inches minimum. This was consistent with a massive humanoid hand, not any known animal. The producer called for medical extraction for Marcus. Marcus refused to leave. "I'm not going through those woods alone, and you need the camera crew." He stayed despite being clearly traumatized, jumping at every sound. Buck called an emergency meeting at 9 a.m. Should they continue or abort? Arguments for leaving included the physical attack, crew injury, and seriously compromised safety. Arguments for staying included only 1 night remaining, incredible evidence already captured, and the belief that daylight hours should be safe. The production company via satellite phone pressured them to continue. "Can you make it 1 more night?" Buck reluctantly agreed, but set strict conditions. Everyone stays together. No split teams, no one goes anywhere alone, full perimeter lighting, backup generator, weapons loaded and ready. At first sign of danger, immediate extraction. We're not risking lives for footage. During daylight, Jeff and Huckleberry, scouting near camp, found a cave system 200 yards away. Large openings with fresh tracks leading inside. A massive nest of branches inside the entrance. We camped right in their territory, Jeff realized. This explained the aggressive territorial behavior. The creatures were defending their home. That made the coming night even more dangerous. At 7:30 p.m., the entire team deployed together. No split teams this time. Full lighting perimeter was active with the backup generator running. All cameras were positioned. The team formed a defensive formation and waited. Anxiety was extremely high. For the first hour and a half, nothing happened. The silence was too quiet, unnatural, no forest sounds at all. The team was on edge, waiting for something. The calm before the storm feeling was palpable. At 9:15, a massive figure stepped into the light range at the edge of the perimeter. 9 feet tall, covered in dark reddish-brown hair with a muscular build. It stood completely still, staring directly at the team for nearly 3 minutes. This was challenge behavior. Then it stepped back into darkness and disappeared. Between 9:20 and 10 p.m., different creatures appeared at different positions around the perimeter. They showed themselves briefly, then vanished. This was coordinated display, establishing dominance. There's at least 5 of them, Buck counted. At 10:15, large rocks were suddenly thrown from multiple directions simultaneously. Dozens of them hit tents and equipment. One destroyed a camera. Another grazed the sound technician's shoulder. This was a coordinated attack. At 10:18, a rock the size of a baseball hit Wild Bill's back between his shoulder blades. He went down hard. The team rushed to him as he lay conscious but unable to breathe properly. Rocks were still being thrown all around them. Someone yelled, "Get to the vehicles!" Buck shouted, "Everyone move now!" They grabbed Wild Bill and began retreating. At 10:22, as the team moved toward vehicles, a massive creature charged from the tree line. 8 feet tall and enormous, it ran directly at them. The team scattered. Huckleberry tripped and fell. The creature was heading straight for him. The creature reached Huckleberry, grabbed his backpack, and lifted him completely off the ground. It threw him 5 feet through the air. Huckleberry hit the ground hard. The creature stood over him as Huckleberry screamed. Buck fired his gun into the air. The gunshot made the creature pause. It looked at Buck, made a decision, then released Huckleberry. It backed away slowly, never breaking eye contact with Buck, then turned and disappeared into darkness within seconds. The team grabbed Huckleberry. He was conscious but terrified, his back injured from being thrown. Wild Bill was still in severe pain. "Get in the trucks now!" Everyone ran, abandoning all equipment. Their only goal was getting out alive. They reached the vehicles and piled in frantically. Engines started. The headlights revealed multiple large figures watching them leave. The creatures didn't pursue. Their mission was accomplished. Territory defended. The team escaped at 10:28 p.m., speeding down the mountain road, leaving everything behind. 2 crew members were seriously injured. The most violent encounter mountain monsters ever documented was over, but the consequences were just beginning. The 2 trucks sped down mountain roads for 40 minutes to reach Pike County Medical Center. Everyone was silent except for groans of pain. Wild Bill could barely breathe. Huckleberry's back was seizing up. Marcus's scratches were bleeding through his bandage. The sound technician's shoulder was swelling rapidly. At 11:15 p.m., they reached the emergency room. 4 team members required immediate treatment. Wild Bill was taken for x-rays. His diagnosis: cracked rib with severe bruising across his back, showing impact pattern consistent with a large rock. The doctor said, "You're lucky it's not worse. That rock hit with serious force." He was prescribed pain medication and restricted from activity for 2 weeks. Huckleberry's examination revealed severe lower back strain, possible herniated disc, and whiplash from being thrown. Bruising covered his shoulders and back where the creature grabbed him. The bruises were handprint-shaped, measuring 10 to 11 inches in span, much larger than any human hand. Medical staff photographed and measured them, confused about what could have grabbed him with such force. Marcus's scratches showed signs of infection 24 hours later. Antibiotics were prescribed. The wounds were deeper than initially thought. The 3 parallel marks would scar permanently, leaving him with proof of what attacked him. The producer arrived at the hospital with network executives on conference call. They discussed liability concerns, insurance questions, and legal implications. 4 injured crew members with documented physical attacks created serious complications. Willie reviewed the footage in the hospital waiting room. The rock throwing was clearly visible. The creature charging Huckleberry was captured on camera. Physical contact was documented. Huckleberry being thrown was visible. The creature standing over him was filmed. "This is the most violent encounter ever filmed," Willie said quietly. Network executives immediately expressed concern. This went beyond entertainment. People were genuinely hurt. Do we air this? Legal teams began reviewing footage. Insurance companies started investigating. OSHA became potentially involved. The evidence was undeniable, but the question became, what should be done about it? Network lawyers reviewed all footage and identified multiple liability issues. Crew members were injured during production, making the company potentially liable. Workers' compensation claims were likely. OSHA violations were possible. The insurance company denied coverage, invoking acts of nature exclusions. Legal exposure was too great. The violence factor was unprecedented. This episode showed real physical attacks, not implied danger. Actual documented violence with people genuinely hurt on camera. This was different from typical Mountain Monsters content. It crossed the line from investigation to assault. Network standards determined it was too intense for television. Travel Channel's brand image was at stake. The network was known for paranormal entertainment, not graphic violence. This episode showed people being attacked, injured seriously, and traumatized psychologically. Sponsors might object. The reputation could be damaged. It didn't fit their brand. Internal ethical debates questioned whether profiting from crew injuries was exploitation. The team went through genuine trauma for entertainment purposes. Was it ethical to broadcast that? The network chose ethics over potential profit. Buck initially wanted the episode to air. People need to see what's out there. This is proof. But after reflection, he changed his mind. My team got hurt. Marcus, Wild Bill, Huckleberry injured. Maybe some things aren't worth proving. He supported the network's decision. Team members' views were divided. Some wanted evidence shown. We went through that. People should see. Others were traumatized. I don't want to relive it. Don't want my pain as entertainment. Huckleberry especially opposed airing footage of being physically attacked and thrown. Too personal, too traumatic. In November 2019, Travel Channel officially banned the episode. It will never air on television. Footage was archived but not destroyed, kept from the public. Team members signed NDAs about specific details. The general story could be discussed, but not graphic footage details. The network issued a vague public statement. Due to production complications, the episode will not air. No specifics were given. Fans speculated wildly and rumors spread, but the truth remained hidden until now. In March 2020, an anonymous crew member posted on Reddit claiming to have worked on Mountain Monsters. They described the Kentucky incident. Crew was attacked. People got hurt. Episode banned. The post was deleted quickly, but screenshots spread everywhere. Hospital records leaked online with names redacted, but injuries documented. 4 patients treated the same night from incident at Devil's Creek Hollow. Cracked rib, back injury, lacerations. This corroborated the Reddit post. Proof something really happened. A small Pike County newspaper article from September 2019 was found. Television crew injured during filming. 4 transported to hospital. Wildlife encounter suspected. The article confirmed the date and location, matching all leaked information. Wild Bill posted cryptically in October 2019. Sometimes the hunt hunts you back. Huckleberry went dark on social media for 3 months. Marcus left Mountain Monsters permanently, never returning to the crew. The trauma was too severe. Buck Lowe was never the same after Kentucky. He became more cautious as a leader, questioning every investigation. Is this worth risking my team? He won't ignore warnings anymore. The elder told them not to go. They should have listened. Wild Bill's rib healed within months, but psychological impact remained. He's more hesitant on investigations now, constantly checking surroundings. That night changed me. Realize these things can kill us. We're not invincible. Huckleberry's back problems persist years later. He required physical therapy for months and still has occasional pain. The handprint bruises took weeks to fade, but the memory never fades. Being grabbed by that thing, thrown like I weighed nothing, that strength was inhuman. He focuses on technology now, keeping distance. I've been close enough. Don't need to experience that again. Marcus never returned to paranormal work. He took camera jobs on nature documentaries. I'm done with cryptids. Almost died in those woods. He can't watch Mountain Monsters anymore without triggering anxiety attacks. Mountain Monsters protocols were completely overhauled. Enhanced safety measures, medical personnel on every shoot, satellite phones mandatory, Emergency extraction plans required hazard assessments before each hunt. The banned episode changed how the show operates permanently. The episode remains banned with no plans to ever release it despite fan demand. Legal reasons remain valid. Footage exists in a vault with heavily restricted access. Only lawyers and executives have seen it. What we know for certain: 4 crew members injured, medical records documented. Physical attacks occurred and were captured on camera. The episode was completed. Network chose not to air it. The ban remains in effect. This was the most violent encounter the show ever documented. The lesson learned: not all cryptids are passive. Some are territorial and violent. Yahoos are different from typical Bigfoot. Warnings should be heeded. Safety over evidence. People over profit. Some hunts should be abandoned. Devil's Creek Hollow remains off limits. Mountain monsters will never return there.
For years, Mountain Monsters thrilled viewers with folklore, fear, and friendship, a group of rugged hunters chasing legends through the heart of Appalachia. But behind the laughter and brotherhood, one of them carried a secret the cameras never showed. Joe Huckleberry Lott, the protector of the AIMS team, has finally spoken out about a season the network erased, a mission so disturbing it was locked away and never broadcast. What did they really find deep in those West Virginia woods? Why did producers order it buried? Make sure you're subscribed, because what Huckleberry revealed was never meant to reach the public. Joe Huckleberry Lott was the backbone of Mountain Monsters. While the rest of the AIMS crew brought the chaos and the humor, Huckleberry brought calm, strength, and a quiet sense of control. To fans, he was the man who never lost his cool, even when the woods came alive with roars and shadows. But those who worked beside him knew there was more to him than what the cameras showed. He wasn't just the team's enforcer, he was its protector, both physically and emotionally. When others panicked, he was the one keeping the group together. By the time the show hit its stride around 2015, Huckleberry had become the heart of the team. He and Trapper shared an unspoken bond, a trust built over decades of friendship and hunts that pushed them to their limits. He didn't crave fame or recognition. He didn't need to prove himself on camera. He was there for the hunt, the brotherhood, and the truth. But with every new expedition, the tone of Mountain Monsters was shifting. The hunts were getting darker, the encounters stranger, and the fear on the crew's faces less performative. Fans noticed that Huckleberry began to change too. The once light-hearted guardian grew quieter and more serious. He would often walk off camera between shots, staring into the trees like he was listening for something. On one occasion, when Buck joked about calling out the beast, Huckleberry snapped, something viewers had never seen. "You don't call it out unless you're ready for it to answer," he said flatly. The mood turned cold. Behind the scenes, Trapper and Jeff reportedly warned him to take a break, but he refused. He told them there was unfinished business in the woods, something he couldn't walk away from. What few people knew was that during the show's peak, an investigation had already been filmed that no one outside the crew would ever see. It was darker, more dangerous, and would eventually become the buried secret that haunted Huckleberry for years to come. And when the truth finally came out, it wasn't the monsters that terrified him. It was the men who tried to make that season disappear. ChatGPT said, in late 2017, the Mountain Monsters crew began filming what was supposed to be their boldest season yet. One that would take them deeper into the Appalachian wilderness than ever before. The production notes listed the location simply as Site 7, a stretch of remote forest land in southern West Virginia with no nearby towns, cell service, or paved roads. Local whispers claimed strange lights had been seen hovering over the ridge, and hunters reported finding deer carcasses stacked in unnatural patterns. It sounded like the perfect setup for another AIMS adventure, but the team had no idea what they were walking into. From the first day, things felt wrong. The weather changed unpredictably, electronics malfunctioned, and even seasoned woodsmen like Huckleberry admitted the air felt off. The first night, they heard movement beyond their camp, not the scurrying of small animals, but heavy footsteps circling the perimeter. Jeff's thermal scanner picked up a large bipedal shape, but when the team rushed to intercept, the figure was gone. The next morning, they found claw marks etched into the side of their utility trailer, 3 vertical grooves that tore straight through the metal. Over the following days, Huckleberry's demeanor began to shift. He was more alert than usual, constantly scanning the tree line, urging the others to keep their voices down. One cameraman recalled him muttering, "It's watching how we move." The others laughed it off, but Huckleberry didn't join in. He stopped sleeping, instead pacing the edges of camp until sunrise. By the end of the second week, the team had enough footage to fill multiple episodes. But when they returned from that final night's hunt, Huckleberry refused to hand over his camera. "Not this one," he told the producers. "It's not ready to be seen." Hours later, that camera was quietly taken from his bunk and sent off with the rest of the hard drives for post-production. Within days, Mountain Monsters vanished from the production schedule. Huckleberry wouldn't talk about it for years, but those who were there said the truth was simple. That night, they'd captured something the network wasn't prepared to air, and he knew it the moment it stepped into frame. The night that changed everything began like any other hunt. Long hours, freezing wind, and the kind of quiet that makes every twig snap sound like a gunshot. The AIMS team had been tracking strange movement along a ridgeline near the Tug Fork River, following prints that seemed to belong to something walking upright. Jeff's thermal scanner kept picking up flashes of heat that moved too fast to be an animal. By midnight, the team split into pairs to cover more ground. Huckleberry and Buck went north with a camera, while Wild Bill and Jeff circled south to monitor motion sensors. At 1:43 a.m., Jeff's radio crackled with a single word from Huckleberry: movement. The static that followed lasted over a minute. Then, through the interference, came what sounded like breathing, deep, rhythmic, and close to the microphone. The crew sprinted toward Huckleberry's location. When they found him, he was standing motionless in the dark, staring uphill. The camera was still rolling, but what it captured would later send chills through anyone who saw it. A faint shape stood between 2 trees, at least 8 feet tall, its outline shimmering as if the air itself was bending around it. It wasn't a clear figure, more like a distortion, something not fully there. As Huckleberry whispered, "It's looking at us." The figure moved, but it didn't charge or retreat. It tilted its head, the way a person studies something, and then it vanished, as if the night swallowed it whole. The team stood frozen, unable to speak. Then, all at once, every piece of equipment they carried shut down. When the cameras rebooted, the time code had jumped forward 9 minutes. No one remembered what happened during that gap. The crew's radios screamed with static, and Buck started shaking, muttering, "It was behind us." Later, when they returned to camp, they found that several of their traps had been tripped, not by animals, but by something that seemed to drag the bait out without triggering the sensors. The footage was reviewed once in the field tent, once before the producers ordered it packed and labeled "pending review." Huckleberry tried to stop them, insisting the world deserved to see what they'd caught. But the look in his eyes told another story. Whatever he saw that night, it wasn't excitement, it was fear. He later said quietly to a crew member, "That thing was thinking. It wasn't hiding. It was deciding." And that was the last night Mountain Monsters ever filmed in West Virginia's Site 7. When filming wrapped at Site 7, the team expected to head home, regroup, and begin editing as usual. Instead, they were met by silence. Discovery's production office called the next morning and told them to stay put. Within 48 hours, a separate crew arrived. Not network staff, but men in plain clothes with clipboards and unmarked cases. They said they were media auditors, but none of the AIMS members recognized them. Their first order was simple: turn over all footage, batteries, and storage drives immediately. At first, the team thought it was a legal review. Maybe the network worried about liability, but things felt off from the start. One of the men confiscated Huckleberry's personal GoPro, despite his protests that it contained only camp footage. When he refused, they threatened to remove him from the show entirely. They weren't producers, Huckleberry said later. They were there to take everything. Trapper, already struggling with health issues, tried to push back. He demanded to know why the network had brought in outsiders instead of their regular editing crew. The men gave no explanation. Instead, they packed every hard drive into padded cases, sealed them, and left without saying where they were going. By that evening, the Mountain Monsters crew had been told to suspend all filming pending corporate review. No one ever saw the footage again. The following week, every AIMS member received an updated non-disclosure agreement, far stricter than anything they'd signed before. It prohibited discussion of unaired material and field activity beyond approved production boundaries. Huckleberry was furious. They didn't want us talking about what we found, he later told a close friend. They wanted it gone. Within days, the show's website quietly removed upcoming episode listings. The network's contact with the crew dropped to near zero. Calls went unanswered. Paychecks were delayed. Trapper reportedly told Huckleberry, "They buried it, brother." Whatever was on those tapes scared somebody. Behind closed doors, rumors spread among editors that Discovery had turned over the Site 7 footage to a private analysis firm for content evaluation. No one from the original production team was allowed to see it again. For Huckleberry, that was the breaking point. The show he'd devoted his life to had suddenly gone dark, and the evidence of what they'd encountered, his proof that they weren't just chasing legends, was gone. Years later, he'd described that moment as the first time he realized Mountain Monsters wasn't just being canceled, it was being erased. In the weeks that followed, Huckleberry couldn't shake what had happened at Site 7, or the way it had all been taken from him. He kept expecting a call from the producers, an email, anything. Nothing came. When he reached out to the editor he'd worked with for years, the man refused to talk on the phone, sending only a short message, "Don't ask about it again." At first, Huckleberry thought it was some kind of legal mess. Maybe Discovery had shelved the project for budget reasons, but then the dreams started. He'd wake up, drenched in sweat, convinced he was back in the woods, hearing that same guttural breathing. He told Yvette Fielding in a later interview that he felt like something was unfinished, like it didn't stay there. The rest of the AIMS crew tried to move on, but everyone felt the tension. Buck mentioned that his camera batteries would drain whenever he reviewed footage from that trip. Jeff said his computer froze every time he tried to open the backup folder from Site 7. Wild Bill joked about it on camera, but even he stopped smiling when the jokes kept turning into static-filled silence. A few months later, Huckleberry met privately with a Discovery contact who'd quietly worked on the show since its beginning. What she told him made his blood run cold. The footage from Site 7 hadn't been lost. It had been transferred to a research firm for content evaluation. The same phrase the plainclothed men had used. They said it wasn't entertainment, she told him. They said it was evidence. That was the moment Huckleberry realized the show wasn't being paused. It was being buried. He tried warning the rest of the crew, but they were already under renewed NDAs and legal silence. To outsiders, the delay looked like routine network business. To Huckleberry, it felt like a cover-up. "We showed them something real," he said later, "and real is bad for business." The incident changed him. He stopped giving interviews, stopped smiling during fan conventions. Whatever the AIMS team found that night wasn't just erased from television, it had been erased from their lives. When word finally spread that Mountain Monsters was on hiatus, the public assumed it was due to production issues or Trapper's declining health. But behind closed doors, the reality was far more chilling. After the Site 7 incident, Discovery executives grew increasingly nervous. Reports circulated internally about audio anomalies and disturbing visual content. Editors who had worked on the footage described it as wrong, not just eerie, but unnatural. One of them allegedly quit after reviewing a short clip that showed a distorted figure moving between frames, almost as if it were aware of being filmed. When played back frame by frame, the creature's head appeared to turn toward the lens. The network's lawyers intervened soon after. All hard drives were sealed, and a confidentiality directive was sent to every contractor who had handled the material. The wording was unusual. Phrases like potential legal risk and biological misidentification appeared in documents that had nothing to do with entertainment. That's when the whispers began that Discovery wasn't just afraid of ridicule. They were afraid of what the footage might reveal. Meanwhile, Huckleberry refused to let it go. He contacted an editor he trusted and asked for any copy of the raw recordings, even a corrupted version. A week later, he received a cryptic message. They're not supposed to exist anymore. Soon after, his calls stopped going through. According to crew members, he started keeping notes of everything: dates, locations, the names of those who had confiscated the drives. He believed the footage had been sent to a private facility under the guise of forensic evaluation. By summer 2018, Discovery pulled Mountain Monsters from its lineup completely. The official reason was creative restructuring. But insiders knew better. The Site 7 tapes had triggered something corporate couldn't control or explain. Huckleberry described the decision as a panic move, a way to erase a problem before it grew. They weren't afraid of us faking something, he later told a friend. They were afraid we caught something real. For the first time in the show's history, AIMS wasn't hunting monsters. The network was hunting their evidence. And in that battle, Huckleberry was the only one still fighting back. The fallout from the Site 7 incident tore through the AIMS crew like a slow-moving storm. By early 2019, their unity, the brotherhood that had carried them through years of hunts, was fracturing under the pressure. Buck became withdrawn, rarely returning calls. Jeff buried himself in research, scouring old Appalachian folklore for anything that resembled what they'd seen. Wild Bill tried to keep morale up with humor, but even his laughter sounded forced. Huckleberry, once their steady center, had become consumed by what the network had taken from them. They killed the show to protect themselves, he told a close friend. But it's not the show that needs protecting, it's us. His obsession with uncovering the truth grew worse. He started meeting privately with small-town locals who claimed to have seen the same shimmering figure near the mountains where Site 7 had been filmed. Some of their stories were eerily similar: bright distortions in the trees, machinery shutting down, missing time. Huckleberry began to wonder whether the creature they'd filmed wasn't just in that one location, but following them. He once told Buck, "We didn't leave it in the woods, man. It left with us." The others wanted to move on, maybe even revive Mountain Monsters under a new banner, but Huckleberry refused. "Until they release that footage," he said, "everything else is just noise." That determination, bordering on obsession, alienated him from the crew. What had started as a brotherhood built on trust had turned into quiet suspicion. They were afraid to talk, afraid to be seen as disloyal, afraid of who might still be listening. Not long after, Discovery's lawyers reached out again, this time warning that any future mention of Site 7 or the unreleased season would result in immediate legal action. That sealed the division. The others walked away, choosing silence over risk. Huckleberry, though, couldn't let it rest. He told friends he was being followed, that unmarked trucks sometimes idled outside his home. Whether paranoia or truth, no one could say. But everyone noticed he was no longer sleeping well. By that point, Mountain Monsters was officially dead. But the story of what happened at Site 7 was far from over. For Huckleberry, it wasn't a canceled season anymore. It was a cover-up, and he was the only one still brave or reckless enough to dig into it. By early 2020, the story of Mountain Monsters had gone completely silent. No updates, no interviews, no official statements. But that changed when a small paranormal podcast called Hollow Earth Frequency announced a surprise guest, Joe Huckleberry Lott. Fans expected jokes and nostalgia. What they got instead was something closer to a confession. He sounded tired, his usual steady drawl replaced with hesitation. "They told us never to talk about that season," he said. "But if I'm being honest, what we found out there, it wasn't just some animal." The hosts pressed him for details, but Huckleberry refused to name the location or describe the creature directly. "Let's just say it wasn't supposed to move the way it did," he said. "It was thinking." Watching his tone shifted when one host laughed nervously. "You think I'm kidding?" he said quietly. It was like it knew what we were going to do before we did it. The podcast went viral overnight, but within 48 hours, the episode was deleted across all platforms. The show's hosts later claimed they were hit with a legal takedown from Discovery's attorneys, citing breach of confidentiality. Huckleberry didn't return for a second interview, and fans who tried contacting him online found his social media pages suddenly inactive. A few weeks later, however, an anonymous Reddit user claiming to be part of the Mountain Monsters production team posted that a hard drive had gone missing from Discovery's archives years earlier. The post described a 90-minute rough cut labeled S7E01, unclassified footage, showing Huckleberry staring into a camera and saying, "This shouldn't be on TV." The post was removed within hours. When Huckleberry was later asked in person if the footage existed, he gave a chilling answer. "If you've seen it, you know why they buried it." Then he smiled faintly and added, "Some things, once you see them, they don't let you go." That was the last public statement Joe Huckleberry Lott ever made about Mountain Monsters. From then on, every time someone asked about the missing season, he just said the same 6 words. Today, Joe Huckleberry Lott rarely talks about Mountain Monsters at all. He still appears at conventions from time to time, still smiles for fans, but the spark that once defined him seems dimmed. When asked about Site 7, he politely changes the subject. Those closest to him say he's never been the same since that final, unaired season. He keeps a small leather notebook everywhere he goes, the same one he used to jot coordinates during hunts, but now it's filled with names, weather patterns, and strange symbols he refuses to explain. In the years since the podcast incident, more fragments of the mystery have leaked out. A few seconds of lost footage occasionally surface online. Usually grainy clips showing Huckleberry standing in fog, whispering, "It's still here." Each time, the clips vanish almost as quickly as they appear. Discovery denies every leak. Still, fans remain convinced the buried season exists somewhere, hidden in an archive or locked in a private collection. Some even claim to have found coordinates etched faintly in one episode's closing credits that lead deep into the Appalachian wilderness. For Huckleberry, though, the chase is over. In a rare 2024 appearance, he was asked if he'd ever return to the mountains to finish what they started. He smiled sadly and said, "We already finished it. We just didn't win." Then, after a long pause, he added, "Whatever's up there, it's still watching." And that's where the story ends. Not with a finale, not with closure, but with a warning. The lost season of Mountain Monsters isn't just a rumor or a legend. It's a scar on the men who lived it. Because according to Huckleberry, the real monster was never the creature they hunted. It was the silence that followed when they found it.